Section 3. You'll hear Melanie, a student, talking to one of her lecturers about her studies. First, you have some time to look at questions 21 to 27. Now listen carefully and answer questions 21 to 27.
Excuse me, Dr. Johnson. May I speak to you for a minute?
Sure, come in.
I'm Melanie Griffin. I'm taking your course in population studies.
Right. Well, Melanie, how can I help you?
I'm having a bit of trouble with a second assignment, and it's due in 12 days.
What sort of trouble are you having? Is the assignment question a problem?
Well, that's part of the problem. I've been having trouble getting hold of the books. I've been to the library several times and all the books are out.
Sounds like you should have started borrowing books a bit earlier.
Well, I had a really big assignment due in for another course and I've been spending all my time on that, and I thought...
You might get an extension of time to finish your assignment for me?
If that's possible, but I don't know if...
Well, yes, it is possible, but extensions are normally given only for medical or compassionate reasons. Otherwise, it's really a question of organizing your study, and we don't like giving extensions to students who simply didn't plan their work properly. What did you get for your first assignment?
I got 87%.
Yes, you did very well, indeed. So, obviously, you can produce good work.
I don't think I'll need too much extra time, as long as I can get hold of some of the important references.
Well, since you did so well in your first assignment, I'm prepared to give you an extra 2 weeks for this one. So, that'll mean you'll need to submit it about a month from now.
Oh, thank you.
Now, what about the reading materials? Have you checked out the journal articles in the list?
No, not yet. There were about 20 of them, and I wasn't sure which ones would be most useful or important.
Well, they're all useful, but I don't expect anyone to read them all because a number of them deal with the same issues. Let me give you some suggestions. The article by Anderson and Hawker is really worth reading.
Right, I'll read that one.
You should also read the article by Jackson, but just look at the part on the research methodology, how they did it.
Okay, Jackson. Got that.
And if you have time, the one by Roberts says very relevant things, although it's not essential.
So, okay, if it's useful, I'll try and read that one.
Now, the one by Morris... I wouldn't bother with that at this stage if I were you.
Okay, I won't bother with Morris. Oh, now, someone told me the article by Cooper is important.
Well, yes, in a way. But just look at the last part, where he discusses the research results. And lastly, there's Forster. I can't think why I included that one. It's not bad, and could be of some help, but not that much.
Before you hear the rest of the conversation, you have some time to look at questions 28 to 30. Now listen and answer questions 28 to 30.
Now, let's deal with the assignment question. What's the problem there?
It's the graph on page 2.
What seems to be the problem? It's just the bar graph showing reasons why people change where they live.
Well, I've got a photocopy, but the reasons at the bottom are missing.
Ah, okay. Look at the first bar on the graph. Now, that indicates the number of people who move because they want more space.
Oh, I see. Bar 1. Okay. Now, what about the next bar?
Bar 2 is to do with the people living nearby, disturbing them, so they chose to move away to somewhere quieter. Now let's look at bar number 3. Another reason people change their place of living is because they want to be closer to the city.
OK. Proximity to the city is an issue.
Now, bar number 4 refers to problems when the owner of the property won't help fix things that go wrong. In other words, the owner is not helpful, and so the tenants move out.
OK. Now, what about bar 5?
Bar 5 is about those people who move because they need a bus or train to get them into the city or to go to work.
OK. And bar 6?
Bar number 6 is interesting. That reason was given quite a lot. People moving because they wanted to be in a more attractive neighborhood.
Oh, yes. Thank you very much.
That is the end of section 3. You now have half a minute to check your answers. Section 3. You'll hear 3 friends discussing an assignment they're going to work on together. First, you have some time to look at questions 21 to 26. Now listen carefully and answer questions 21 to 26.
Oh, there you are. Good. Sorry, I'm a bit late. There was a long queue. So, have you worked out how to deal with this assignment then?
Not yet. We've only been here a couple of minutes ourselves.
Can you just remind me what the task is exactly?
Well, there are 3 parts to it. First, we've got to write an essay about ways of collecting data. Then...
What's the title of the essay exactly?
I've got it here. Assess the 2 main methods of collecting data in social science research.
And how much do we need to write?
1,500 words. That's for the essay. Then for the second part of the assignment, we have to choose one method of data collection and carry out a small-scale study, making appropriate use of the method chosen to gather data from at least 5 subjects.
And then we have to write a report on the study?
That's right, of 3,000 to 4,000 words.
Did you get as far as discussing which form of data collection we should go for? Questionnaire or interview, isn't it?
Yeah, I think we should use a questionnaire. It'll be so much less time-consuming than organising interviews, I reckon. Once we've agreed on the wording of it, we only have to send it out and wait for the responses.
Yes, I think it probably would be quicker. But what did that article he gave us last week say about the quality of data from questionnaires?
I'm pretty sure it recommended questionnaires as a source of highly reliable data. As long as you design the questionnaire properly in the first place, the data will be fine.
No, I'm sure it talked about drawbacks as well, didn't it? Something about the response rate and the problems you get if it's too low?
Yeah, but we only need data from 5 subjects anyway.
Oh, I suppose so. Another drawback I remember it mentioned was that questionnaire data tends not to reveal anything unexpected because it is limited to the questions fixed in advance by the researcher.
Come on, Rosa, this is only a practice. It's not meant to be real research, is it?
Well, not sure about that.
Before you hear the rest of the conversation, you have some time to look at questions 27 to 30. Now listen and answer questions 27 to 30.
Maybe I'd better go through the article again, just to be sure. Can you remember what it was called?
Sample Surveys in Social Science Research, I think. By Meta.
MEHTA?
Yeah. And he also recommended a more recent book called Survey Research by Bell, I think. It's in that series published by London University.
And if we try to use interviews instead, I saw a book in the departmental library that'll be helpful. It's called Interviews That Work by Wilson, published in Oxford in 1988.
Right. Oh, I've got a tutorial now. Can we meet up again later this week? What about Friday morning?
Suits me. 11 o'clock?
Fine.
Before Friday, I think we should all look through the reading list.
That is the end of section 3. You now have half a minute to check your answers. Section 3. You'll hear a conversation in a university student services office. First, you have some time to look at questions 21 to 25. Now listen carefully and answer questions 21 to 25.
Hello, I'm Dawn Matthews.
Yes, hello. I've been referred to you because I'm inquiring about the refresher courses that you run. I'd like to find out a bit more about them.
OK. Well, we run quite a few different short courses for students who are either returning to study or studying part-time. Tell me about your situation.
Well, I think that I really need some help in preparing for the coming semester, especially to build up my confidence a bit and help me study effectively because, you see, I've been out in the workforce for nearly 12 years now, so it really is a long time since I was last a student.
Yes, it can seem like a long time, can't it? Well, let me start by telling you what courses we have that might suit you. Are you an undergraduate or a postgraduate, arts or sciences?
Undergraduate, and I'm in the business faculty.
Right then. Well, first of all, there's our intensive Study for Success seminar on the 1st and 2nd of February.
Mm-hmm.
It's aimed at students like you who are uncertain about what to expect at college and looks at a fairly wide range of approaches to university learning to motivate you to begin your study and build on your own learning strategies.
That sounds good. What are some of the strategies that are presented?
Well, we try to cover all aspects of study. Some of the strategies in writing, for example, would be improving your planning for writing, organising your thinking, and building some techniques to help you write more clearly. With reading, there'll be sessions aimed at getting into the habit of analysing material as you read it, and tips to help you record and remember what you've read. It really is very important to begin reading confidently right from the beginning. There's also advice on how to get the most from your lectures and practice in giving confident presentations, as well as how to prepare for exams.
What about the motivational side of things?
Well, there's a range of motivational exercises that we do to help the students feel positive and enthusiastic about their study. The process of learning and exploring a subject can lead to a whole new way of looking at the world, and the study skills and techniques that you build up can be applied in all sorts of different ways.
Before you hear the rest of the conversation, you have some time to look at questions 26 to 30. Now listen and answer questions 26 to 30.
Actually, I'm very excited about the whole thing of taking up studying again, but, I'm a little nervous about whether I'll manage to get everything done. I suppose it's the same for all mature students.
Of course it is. Two of the key components of the course are time management and overcoming procrastination. People discover that once they learn to plan their days, all the work can be accomplished and there'll still be time for leisure.
Is there an enrolment fee?
Well, just a minute, let's see. The cost is £30, which includes all course materials and morning tea. You have to arrange your own lunch.
Well, that wouldn't be a problem. I already make sandwiches for my 3 kids and my wife and myself every day. I won't have to change my routine.
No. Now, I need to tell you that this is a very popular course and it's essential that you book well ahead of time. In fact, the course convener tells me that there are only 5 places left.
What other course might be good for me?
There is one other that you could benefit from. It's simply called Learning Skills for University Study and is on 3 consecutive mornings, starting on a Monday from 9 to 12 and costs £25. This is aimed at upgrading the study skills most school leavers have and help them cope with the increased demands of university study. It focuses mainly on making students more responsible for their own success.
What sort of things are covered in this course?
Well, basically, it's more advanced thinking, note-taking, reading and writing strategies, but also some input about stress management.
I think I'd be better off starting from the basics and looking at all the strategies, don't you?
Yes, from what you've told me, I think that's more in line with your situation.
All right then. Can I book a place on the Study for Success seminar course now?
Yes. Let me just get out a registration form and take down your details.
That is the end of section 3. You now have half a minute to check your answers. Section 3. You will hear a conversation between 2 students who are studying to be teachers, talking about science experiments. First, you have some time to look at questions 21 to 26. Now listen carefully and answer questions 21 to 26.
Hi, Sue.
Hi, Mike. So what happened to you last week?
Oh, I was sick with the flu. What's this I hear about a big assignment we've got to do?
Oh, well, basically, we've got to find 2 science experiments to do with a group of 8-year-old children at the local primary school. And we've got to complete it by the end of the week.
That sounds like hard work. Where are we supposed to get the ideas for these experiments from?
Well, I managed to get hold of 2 books from the library.
Oh, well done.
How about if we take a look at the experiments in this book first and see if anything looks suitable? I can make notes as we go about equipment and the purpose of the experiments.
OK, let's see. The first experiment is called Make Your Own Hovercraft, which sounds very ambitious. Mind you, you only need 20 balloons and a table. You don't need any special engines or anything like that.
What do you do with it all?
You blow up the balloons and you balance the table on them. Upside down, of course, and the kids get to ride around on it. You know, the other kids sort of push them around the room. The main purpose is to show how hovercrafts work and how things hover around on just a cushion of air.
OK, that doesn't sound too bad.
OK, ready for number 2?
Mm-hmm.
Now, this one is called Unusual Measures of Lengths, and you basically use lots of paper clips. The kids go around the class measuring things, you know, how long the desk is and that sort of thing. And then they all compare their answers. and basically, because not all paper clips are the same length, they should come up with some strange answers. It's supposed to demonstrate the importance of having fixed units of measurement.
Yeah, that's not bad.
OK, now for number 3, you need rock salt or copper sulphate.
Oh, I'm not sure about that.
Well, just put down the rock salt then. Apart from that, you only need a jar of water. And basically you dissolve lots of salt into the water and watch the crystals form. So it basically teaches the kids about growing crystals.
Yeah, I suppose it would be nice to grow something. Let's move on and have a look at number 4.
OK, this one is called Spinning Colour Wheel. It looks like you get some cardboard and draw a circle on it, divide it into 6 equal segments and colour each one in using different colours, then you thread a piece of string through the middle.
So we'd need some string as well.
Yes, sorry, and you spin the wheel around, and if you can get it spinning fast enough, hopefully the colours all merge and show up as white.
Oh, I didn't know that. What's the principle behind it?
Well, it's pretty elementary physics, really. It teaches them about how white light or ordinary light is made up.
Well, that doesn't sound too bad. Now, there's only one more left in this book, isn't there? What does that one say?
Well, it's another one where they'd get to make something.
Sounds very interesting.
You need quite a lot of equipment, actually. A hand drill, an old record, a pin or needle, some paper and a bolt.
Go on. What do they have to do?
Well, they basically make a record player. The main idea is to teach them about recording sound. But hopefully they'd also see that you need motion and an amplifier to make the sound heard.
OK, well, it does sound interesting. Shall we go through all of those again and decide if any of them are going to be suitable?
Before you hear the rest of the conversation, you have some time to look at questions 27 to 30. Now listen and answer questions 27 to 30.
Right. Number 1. I thought this one sounded nice. There'd be lots of activity, and it doesn't need too much in the way of equipment.
Yes, that's true, but don't you think it's a bit risky to get a group of 8-year-olds pushing each other around a classroom like that? Well, someone could get hurt. No, I don't like the sound of that one at all.
Maybe you're right.
What about number 2, with the paper clips? It sounds tame enough.
Yes, a bit too tame, if you ask me. I think it needs to be something a bit more active and interesting than that, don't you?
Yes, I suppose you're right. We won't get a very good mark if the children don't actually enjoy the experiments. And I suppose we could turn them off science for good. Well, what about the next one, number 3?
Now, I quite like the idea of this one.
Yes, so do I. But I seem to remember when we did it at high school, we had to wait up to a fortnight before we saw any halfway decent results.
Oh, yes. Well, that won't be any good then. We'll only see the kids for 1 or 2 hours at the most.
Yes, and we have to do the experiments and write up our results within a week. So that one won't do at all.
OK. Well, what did you think of number 4?
I like the idea of it, but do you think it will be a bit elementary for them?
Well, they are only 8, you know.
I know, but you know what I mean. Don't you think the activity itself is a bit babyish?
Maybe you're right.
They might have fun, but I mean, cutting out a circle and colouring it in.
OK. Well, what about number 5?
I thought this one sounded a bit too good to be true. Great equipment.
Yeah.
But don't you think it's a bit ambitious for this age group? I mean, I don't want to start off something and then have to abandon it if they just can't cope with it. I could see us ending up doing just about all of the work for them.
I guess you're right. Oh, well, maybe we could store that idea away for later.
Yep. Let's hope this second book has something better.
That is the end of section 3. You now have half a minute to check your answers.
Section 3. You will hear a conversation between a student, Andrew, and a student advisor, Monica, about a diploma course. First, you have some time to look at questions 21 to 25. Now listen carefully and answer questions 21 to 25.
Excuse me, I was told to come here for advice about management diploma courses.
You've certainly come to the right place. Hi, my name is Monica.
Nice to meet you. My name is Andrew Harris.
So, Andrew, have you seen our diploma course prospectus yet?
Yes, I've already looked at it. In fact, I thought the information on course content was really useful. But I'm afraid I'm a bit confused by all the different ways you can do the course. Full-time intensive, part-time, and so on.
Well, let's see if I can help. I think each course type has its advantages and disadvantages, so it really depends on you, your own study habits, and your financial circumstances, of course. Are you working at the moment?
Yes, I've been working in the administration section of the local hospital for the last 3 years. And before that, I worked in the office of a computer engineering company for 2 years. So I've got about 5 years of relevant work experience. And what I'm hoping to focus on is personnel management.
I see. And are you planning to leave your current job to study, or are you thinking about just taking a year off?
I want to know what my options are, really. I don't want to quit my job or anything, and my employers are keen for me to get some more qualifications, but obviously it would be better if I could do a course without taking too much time away from work.
Right. So you don't really want to do the full-time course, then?
No, not really. It's also a question of finances. You see, my office have agreed to pay the cost of the course itself, but I would have to take unpaid leave if I want to study full-time, and, well, I don't think I could afford to support myself with no salary for a whole year.
Okay. Well, you have two other possibilities. You could either do the part-time course, that would be over 2 years, and you wouldn't have to take any time off work, or you could do what we call a modular course. You could do that in 18 months if you wanted, or longer. It's quite flexible, and it would be up to you.
So what does the part-time course involve?
For that, you would join an evening class and have a lecture twice a week. Then you'd have to attend a seminar or discussion workshop 1 weekend a month.
What kind of coursework would I have to do?
Well, it's a mixture. You'd be expected to write an essay each month, which counts towards your final assessment. You have a case study to do by the end of the course, which might involve doing a survey or something like that. And also you need to hand in a short report every 4 weeks.
So that's quite a lot of work then, on top of working every day. It sounds like a lot of studying, and really tiring.
Yeah, you certainly wouldn't have much free time.
Before you hear the rest of the conversation, you have some time to look at questions 26 to 30. Now listen and answer questions 26 to 30.
What about the modular course? What would I have to do for that?
Well, that's where you get the opportunity to study full-time for short periods. That way you can cover a lot of coursework and attend lectures and seminars during the day. And each module lasts for 1 term, say about 12 weeks at a time. There are obvious advantages in this. The main one being that you can study in a much more intensive way, which suits some people much better.
And how many of these modules would I have to do to get the diploma?
The current programme is 2 modules, and then you have to choose a topic to work in more depth. But you can base that on your job, and so you don't need to be away from the office. And how long it takes is up to you.
Mm-hmm.
The important thing is that you don't have to study and work. You can focus on one thing at a time.
Yes, I can see that. It certainly sounds attractive. It would be more expensive, though. I mean, I'd have to support myself without pay for each module.
That's true, so that might be a problem for you. Look, why don't you talk this over with your employers and then come back...
That is the end of section 3. You now have half a minute to check your answers. Section 3. You will hear a discussion between a college tutor and 2 students, Christina and Ibrahim. First, you have some time to look at questions 21 to 26. Now listen carefully and answer questions 21 to 26.
First of all, I'd just like to say, Christina and Ibrahim, that I really enjoyed watching your video about student life last week. And I could see that the rest of the group did too. You did really well, and I hope that you got a lot out of it. I'd like to use this tutorial as a feedback session where you reflect on the experience of doing the project. So, Christina, I was wondering, what did you enjoy most about making the video?
I liked using the camera.
Is it the first time you've operated one like that?
Yes, it is.
Well, the results were very good. Anything else?
I also enjoyed visiting one of the British students we filmed. I'd never been inside a British home before.
Okay, Christina, thanks. What about you, Ibrahim? What did you enjoy?
Well, for me, it was a very good chance to get to know students who are on other courses, because everyone in our group is studying English, and we don't usually have much to do with the rest of the college.
Yes, good. Do you think you'll maintain the contact now?
Well, I hope so. I've invited 3 of them to have dinner with me next week.
Great. If you haven't decided what to make yet, I can tell you they'll love trying Arab dishes. And, of course, it's good for your English, too. Christina, what did you find? What was the most useful aspect of the project from the point of view of the English practice?
I think when we were being shown how to edit the film, we had to follow the instructions, and that was very good practice for me. And I also learned some technical words that I hadn't heard before.
What about you, Ibrahim? What was the most useful for your English?
It was listening to the British students, because they don't speak as slowly as most of the tutors on our course. I think they speak at natural speed, so it forces me to get used to it. And they use a lot of slang.
So you learned some new words which will be useful?
Yes.
Good. I'm glad it helped. Well, we've talked a little bit about enjoyment and about language practice. Were there any other benefits? What else did you feel you'd learned from the project? Was it useful in other ways?
Yes, well, firstly, I learned how to use a video camera, and also I think I really learned a lot about working together with other people. I've never done anything with a group before, and we had to find ways of cooperating and compromising, and sometimes persuading people when they don't agree with you.
Yes, that is a very useful experience, I know.
Before you hear the rest of the discussion, you have some time to look at questions 27 to 30. Now listen and answer questions 27 to 30.
What about you, Ibrahim?
Well, I think I learned a lot about how important editing is. when you're filming, you think that everything's going to be interesting, but in fact we cut around half of it in the end, and then it was much better.
Good. Well, one last thing I'd like to ask. What mistakes do you think you, as a group, that is, made? I mean, to put it another way, if you had to do it all over again, is there anything you'd do differently?
We didn't plan very well. For example, we didn't decide on dates when we'd complete each separate step of the project, and we should have agreed about that in the beginning, because we were always late with everything.
Right. Anything else?
I think we should have tried to experiment more with the camera. I mean, with angles and the focus and that kind of thing.
So you should have been more ambitious. Do you agree, Ibrahim?
Not really. In fact, I think we were too ambitious. We were inexperienced, and we didn't have a lot of time, and we tried to do too much, to make a long film. Next time I would make a shorter one and try to get the quality better.
Well, that's very interesting. Next semester, we will be doing another video project, with a different content, of course, but you'll have an opportunity to put into practice what you've learned this time. Do you have any ideas about a different...
That is the end of section 3. You now have half a minute to check your answers. Section 3. You will hear two friends discussing a course they have just done. First, you have some time to look at questions 21 to 27. Now listen carefully and answer questions 21 to 27.
Oh, Ben, I just remembered I never filled in that form for Nick.
Ah.
Did you do it?
The course feedback form.
Yes. If you want, we can do it together. I've got mine here.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay. Let's have a look then. What do we have to do?
Let's fill in the top first. Let's see. Course code.
It's communication in business.
Okay. Communication in business. I do know that, but what's the code?
CB16 something. CB162, isn't it?
That's it. Okay. And dates. When did we start? I remember my birthday's on May 4th, and it was the day after. It must have been May 5th.
Gosh, doesn't seem that long ago, does it?
No. And we finish at the end of this week on Friday, so that's July 15th.
16th.
Oh.
Monday was the 12th.
Yeah.
Right, that was the easy bit. Now, let's have a look. Please give your comments on the following aspects of the course. Okay, what's the first one? Oh, course organisation. What do you think?
Clear. It was, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think the organisation was clear. Okay, anything else for course organisation?
It was a good thing he gave us the course outline at the beginning in the first session. That was useful, so I'll put that down, shall I?
Yeah.
Now, going on to suggestions for improvement, one thing that wasn't so good, I think we could have done a bit more work at the beginning. I mean, at the beginning it seemed dead easy.
Yeah.
I thought it was going to be really easy, and then all of a sudden in the second half of the course, we got a whole load of work.
Yeah.
Reading to do and essays and things.
Yeah, it'd be better if it was more even. Okay, now, course delivery. Does that mean teaching?
Yeah, I suppose so. Well, what I thought was really good on this course was the standard of teaching. Actually, I mean, some of the teachers were better than others, but the standard generally was fine. Much better than other courses I've been on.
Yeah, I agree. Let's put that then.
Okay.
What about suggestions for improvement?
I didn't think it was all that wonderful when we had great, long group discussion sessions that went on for hours and hours.
Right.
I don't mean we shouldn't have group discussions, just that they shouldn't go on too long.
Before you hear the rest of the discussion, you have some time to look at questions 28 to 30. Now listen and answer questions 28 to 30.
Now, on to materials and equipment.
Oh, now, what was good about some sessions was the handouts.
Yes, I thought all the handouts were good, actually, and some were great, with website addresses and everything.
One problem, though, with materials was the key texts.
Yes, there just weren't enough copies on reserve in the library. And if you can't get the key texts before the session, how are you supposed to do the reading?
Yeah.
And not enough computers. You have to wait ages to get one.
Okay, testing and evaluation. Well, I don't know. It's hard to say until we've got our written assignments back.
Oh, don't talk about it. I only got mine in yesterday. It was a real struggle. Oh, I hate to think what mark I'll get.
Yeah, but at least we've done the oral presentation. I thought that was good, the way I got my feedback really quickly.
Yes, it was. And I liked the way we knew what would be evaluated on. We knew the criteria, so we knew we had to think about clarity, organization, and so on.
Yeah, but I'm not so sure about the written work. One thing, I think, is that there's just too much. It's really stressful.
Oh, yes, I'd agree. And I don't see why they can't let us know the criteria they use for marking.
The written assignments, but he told us.
No, for the final exams.
Oh.
What are they looking for? What are the criteria? What makes a pass or a fail?
Yeah, I never thought of that. It'd be really useful.
Okay, any other comments?
I thought student support was excellent.
Yeah, me too. Okay, excellent. Other comments?
No, I can't think of anything else.
Nor me. Okay, so that's done. Thanks, Ben.
No, thank you.
That is the end of section 3. You now have half a minute to check your answers. Section 3. You will hear a tutor and 2 students discussing a business case study. First, you have some time to look at questions 21 to 24. Now listen carefully and answer questions 21 to 24.
Right. Jason and Karen, now I asked you to look at the case study for Box Telecom as part of your exam assessment. It's interesting because they're in the middle of problems at the moment, and I want you to track how they deal with them. Let's start with you, Karen. Having read through the case study, can you just summarise what the problems were that Box Telecom had to take on board?
Well, of course, what first came to their attention was that despite a new advertising campaign, they were suffering from falling sales, and this is something that had many causes. On top of that immediate problem, what had also happened over the last 2 years was that although they had invested in an expansion plan, they had to face up to increased competition. And before they had a chance to get to grips with the effects of that, they were stalled by a strike. And it was just when they were thinking about making a colossal investment in new machinery for their plants. So they were really in trouble.
Yes, I think that's fair. And, Jason, now you contacted the company, didn't you? What did the company define as the reasons for these problems?
Well, I think they've hit on the right things. It would be easy to say they had invested too heavily or at the wrong time, But in fact, the signs were good, and what they were set back by was high interest rates. At the same time, their longer-term problems, which were affecting their market share, were eventually credited to poor training. And having looked at the details in their last report, I think that's right.
Before you hear the rest of the discussion, you have some time to look at questions 25 to 30. Now listen and answer questions 25 to 30.
So, on to the larger issues then. Karen, what do you think the company will do?
Well, obviously they have the choice of accepting the very favourable terms that another company, KMG plc, have given them to buy them out. That would mean creating a new company with a new image. Or they could decide on a bolder move and offer some new shares if they wanted. But I think they're much more cautious than that and expect they will start trying to find individuals who'd be prepared to back them with some of the capital they need.
Well, you mustn't always assume that dramatic problems require dramatic solutions. Sometimes there's a simple fix, such as changing the guy at the top. If they truly are cautious, then I suspect they will seek to shut down some of their shops. But a more ambitious approach, and one which I think would have more chance of success, would be to alter how they're running things, the management layers and the processes. So, in your analysis, try to think of all the options. Jason?
Yes, it's interesting because I found it a really useful company to study. Its problems cross all types of industries, and it's lucky it's so big. A smaller or even medium-sized company would have gone under by now.
Ah, well, in fact, what I want you two to do is to go away when we've finished our discussion today and write a report. We've looked in general at the telecommunications market in the UK over the last few sessions, and I want you to take Box Telecom as an example and suggest some ways in which they might overcome their problems, and outline the reasons why you think as you do. But try and keep it intrinsic to the company rather than dragging in other examples. Is that okay, Karen?
Yes, I think I can do that. Personally, I've got great hopes for it. I think it will recover. That advertising campaign they did was very strong, and they're very innovative with their products. They set new trends. The company's got to recover, don't you think, Jason?
I'm not sure. I think it can, but it's not a foregone conclusion unless they manage to attract the right level of investment. The company definitely needs a boost, and to attract more highly skilled workers if their recovery is to be long-lasting. When I was talking to the marketing manager, he said to me that he thinks the company had got a great management team. But he would say that, wouldn't he? But they are suffering from having to work with outdated production machinery, and that could cost a lot to put right.
Well, personally, I think the stock market is to blame. I think they were expecting too much of the company, and then inevitably it looked bad when it didn't perform. The market should have had more realistic expectations. And I disagree with you about the advertising campaign, Karen. That's where they could do with some innovation to get sales kick-started. Anyway, let's see what you come up with those.
That is the end of section 3. You now have half a minute to check your answers. Section 3. You will hear a man inquiring about college courses. First, you have some time to look at questions 21 to 25. Now listen carefully and answer questions 21 to 25.
Hi, can I help you?
I was told to come here because I'd like to talk to someone about taking a management course.
Right, I'm one of the tutors, so I should be able to help you.
Oh, good. My name's Brian Ardley. I've decided to enrol on a part-time management course. A friend of mine took one last year and recommended it to me.
Right.
Is there anything I should do before the course, like reading or anything?
We prefer to integrate reading with the course, so we don't give out a reading list in advance. But we like people to write a case study describing an organisation they know.
I've already done that, as my friend told me you wanted one. But would it be possible to sit in on a teaching session to see what it's like? I haven't been a student for quite a while.
Fine. Just let me know which date and I'll arrange it with the tutor.
Now, could I ask you about the college facilities, please?
Anything in particular?
Well, the course is 1 day a week, all day, isn't it? So presumably it's possible to buy food.
Yes, the refectory's open all day.
Does it cater for special diets? I have some food allergies.
Provided you warn the refectory in advance, it won't be a problem.
Good. What about facilities for young children? I'd like to bring my daughter here while I'm studying.
How old is she?
3.
Then she's eligible to join the nursery, which is supervised by a qualified nursery nurse. The waiting list for a place is quite long, though, so you ought to apply now.
OK.
I don't know if our careers advice service would be of any interest to you.
Yes, it might help me decide how to develop my career after the course.
The centre has a lot of reference materials and staff qualified to give guidance on a one-to-one basis.
I noticed a fitness centre next to the college. Is that for students?
It's open to everyone, but students pay an annual fee that's much less than the general public pay.
And presumably the college library stocks newspapers and journals as well as books.
Yes, and there's also an audio-visual room for viewing and listening to videos, cassettes and so on.
Is there also access to computers?
Yes, your tutor will need to arrange with the technical support team for you to get a password, so ask him or her about it when you start the course.
OK.
Before you hear the rest of the conversation, you have some time to look at questions 26 to 30. Now listen and answer questions 26 to 30.
By the way, do you know about our business centre?
No. What's that?
It's a training resource, a collection of materials for people to study on their own or use in their own organisations.
Uh-huh. You mean books and videos?
Yes, and manuals for self-study, plus a lot of computer-based materials so people can work through them at their own speed and repeat anything they aren't sure about. And you can hire laptops to use in your own home or workplace, as well as printers that you can take away.
Does it have anything that I could use to improve my study skills? I don't have much idea about report writing, and I'm sure I'll need it on the course.
Oh, yes, there's plenty of useful material. Just ask one of the staff.
Does the centre cover all the main areas of business?
Yes. Topics like finance and, of course, marketing. That's a popular one. Local managers seem to queue up to borrow the videos.
So it isn't just for students, then?
No, it's for members only, but anyone can join.
How much does it cost?
£100 a year for a company and £50 for an individual, with no discount for students, I'm afraid.
Well, that's very helpful. Well, I think that's all. I'd better go home and fill in the enrolment form. Thanks for all your help.
You're welcome. Goodbye.
Goodbye.
That is the end of section 3. You now have half a minute to check your answers. Section 3. You will hear a discussion between a tutor and an education student called Sandy about the student's dissertation. First, you have some time to look at questions 21 to 25. Now listen carefully and answer questions 21 to 25.
Hello, Sandy. How have you been getting on with your dissertation?
Fine. And I've been working hard on the various action points we agreed on our last tutorial.
Do you want to talk me through what you've done?
Yeah, sure. Well, we agreed on 3 main targets for me to aim for. The first one was to find out about suitable data analysis software.
Yes.
And what I decided to do was to look through catalogues specialising in IT.
That's a good idea. What did you come up with?
I found the names of 2 promising ones.
Right.
But I also thought it'd be worthwhile talking to a lecturer.
Oh, right. Who did you see?
Jane Prince. Do you know her? She's in the computer centre?
Yes, of course. She's the new head.
Yes, well, she was very helpful.
Oh, that's good. Did she suggest anything in particular?
Yeah, she recommended software called VVAT and said I should book up for a couple of practice sessions using VVAT.
Great. I'm sure you'll find them useful.
And, of course, the second target was to draw up a survey checklist, which
Yes, you emailed me it last week.
Have you had a chance to look?
Of course. I think it's good. Very much on the right lines. I'd say your first 2 sections are spot on.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't suggest that you change anything there, but in section 3 you really do need to have questions on teaching experience.
Yeah, I was thinking that section looked a bit short.
Right.
And my third target was do further reading on discipline.
Oh, yes. I mentioned a couple of writers, didn't I?
Yes, well, I got hold of the Banerjee, and I thought that was excellent, but I'm afraid I didn't manage to get hold of the essays about classroom management. You know, the ones by Simon Erickson. The bookshop said it was out of print, and the library doesn't have a copy.
Oh, right. And I'm afraid I've lent my copy to another student. What I suggest you do is try the library again. This time apply for it through the service called Special Loans. Have you done that before? You're entitled to 6 books a year.
Yes, no problem. That's what I'll do.
So, lots of useful work done.
Before you hear the rest of the conversation, you have some time to look at questions 26 to 30. Now listen and answer questions 26 to 30.
So let's look at some new targets. We'll start by having a chat about your Chapter 1. I very much enjoyed reading it. Your written style is very clear, and you've included lots of interesting descriptions of education in your target area. I've just got a couple of suggestions for some additional work.
Of course. Could I just ask, what do you think I should call it?
Well, I'd go for something like context review. What do you think?
Well, short and to the point.
Exactly. Now, as regards specific areas to work on, I'd be quite interested to have a few more statistics about the schools in the different zones.
Oh, that wouldn't be a problem. I can get them from the internet.
Great. And although you did make a reference to quite a few different writers, I think you should aim to cite more works written later than 2000.
OK. That's more difficult, but I can try. When do you want that done by?
Oh, it's not urgent. I should aim for the end of term. But in the meantime, I think you should also be thinking about Chapter 2.
Should I be drafting it already?
No, but I think you should note down its main sections.
Yes. You know, I always find that the hardest part...
I always find it helpful to put some ideas on index cards.
Yeah.
And then you can sort them and even lay them out on the floor. It's a real help.
Well, I'll certainly try it. When would the deadline be for that?
My advice would be to get it done before you embark upon the research. You can always change it later if you need to.
OK, I'll get going on that then.
That is the end of section 3. You now have half a minute to check your answers. Section 3. you will hear two students, Jack and Lucy, discussing a marketing assignment they are working on together. First, you have some time to look at questions 21 to 24. Now listen carefully and answer questions 21 to 24.
Lucy, we really need to get working on this marketing assignment. We've only got 5 weeks left to the end of term to design it, carry it out, and then write up the results.
Sure. Well, let's get started right now. Let's go over the instructions. What exactly do we have to do?
Well, it says here we have to look at one area of the entertainment industry. There's a list of the different types.
What are they?
Music, cinema, theatre, sport, and eating out.
Is that all?
Looks like it.
So we choose one branch of the industry and then we look at how two different groups of people use it. Is that right?
Yes.
And do we have to use any particular method to get our data? Can we mail out a questionnaire or do face-to-face interviews or maybe even observations?
Well, actually, it looks like we don't have a choice. We have to do telephone interviews.
OK, so at least we don't have to waste time deciding between the different methods.
Yeah, that's right. Oh, and the other requirement is the number of interviewees.
Not too many, I hope. 10? 20?
Well, we have to do 2 groups, remember, and it looks like we have to interview 15 for each group.
That's 30 altogether, then. It's going to take ages.
Yes, but remember, we're working on this together, so we'll only have to do 15 each.
OK, so those are all the requirements?
Yes, looks like it.
So, first, which area are we going to choose? My preference would be cinema, since that's where I spend most of my money.
I don't think that's such a good idea. I don't think there are huge differences in the market there. I mean, you get young and old, male and female, rich and poor, all going to the same movies.
Yeah, maybe you're right. Let's make it music, then.
Right. So, what 2 groups will we compare and contrast?
Male and female?
No. Most of my female friends like the same music as me. Different age groups will be much more likely to show up differences, I think.
Before you hear the rest of the discussion, you have some time to look at questions 25 to 30. Now listen and answer questions 25 to 30.
Yeah, I suppose you're right again. I'll take some notes, shall I? So, age groups. Well, what do you think? Maybe 25 or under for one group and 45 or over for the other group? That should show up differences.
Right.
OK, next. How about the kind of music they like? Let's give them some choices and then we can just tick boxes.
OK, let's have pop, jazz, folk, easy listening. What else?
Well, we should include classical. Some people like it, you know.
OK, and then we should have how they listen to music.
The medium, right. Let's include radio, CD, and then I guess there's TV.
What about concerts? You know, in pubs and halls.
Oh yeah, we should include live music, of course.
OK, we're on a roll now. Next point could be about where they actually get their music.
You mean, like, do they buy it in music shops or department stores?
Yes, or download it from the internet.
Right. That could be for recorded music. Then we need another section for live music. Where do they go for that?
OK, let's say disco, pub, club, concert hall.
Or opera house. And I guess we should include karaoke bars.
Not many of them in this city.
OK, we'll leave that out then. So what's left to do?
That's it. Well, now we can make a timescale for doing it.
That is the end of section 3. You now have half a minute to check your answers. Section 3. You will hear a conversation between a librarian and an education student. First, you have some time to look at questions 21 to 27. Now listen carefully and answer questions 21 to 27.
Good afternoon. Can I help you?
Good afternoon. Yes, I've just transferred to the School of Education, and I'd like information about joining the library.
Well, the School of Education has libraries on 2 sites, as I'm sure you know. This one here is the Fordham site, and the other is on Castle Road.
And is there any difference between the 2 libraries?
Not in terms of their facilities. Access to online databases and the internet is available at both sites, and each site has a range of reference materials on education.
Oh, yes, I see.
But the Castle Road site has books on the sociology of education and a collection of textbooks and teaching resources covering most of the subjects taught in secondary schools.
Ah, right. But I'm training to be a primary teacher, so I need to look at materials for the 5 to 11 age group.
Then you've come to the right place. At Fordham, we hold material relating to primary education, as well as special needs. But, of course, you'll need to familiarise yourself with both sites to make the most of our resources.
You haven't mentioned periodicals. Are they held at both sites?
Current issues, yes, but if you want to look at back issues, you'll need to use the CD-ROM databases, which are held here at Fordham.
I see. Now, about borrowing books, I'm living out of town, so I'm hoping I can borrow quite a few items and cut down on the number of trips I have to make.
Right, well, members can borrow 2 books at a time from each site.
Only 2 books?
Only 2 from each site, but that's 4 altogether.
Oh, I see. And how long can I hang on to them for?
The borrowing period is 1 month, but of course books can be renewed. You can renew any item a maximum of 3 times.
Do I have to come to the library to do that?
No, you can do it by telephone or email, but you can't renew overdue books this way, only before or on the due date stamped in the book. We'll need your full name, your borrower number, and the name of the site library you borrowed the items from.
So, theoretically, I can borrow books for up to 3 months. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, provided they're not recalled.
So, what happens then?
Well, sometimes an item is requested by another borrower, in which case we'd send you a letter, and you'd have to return the book within 7 working days. Don't forget, we're closed on Sundays.
Okay.
Before you hear the rest of the conversation, you have some time to look at questions 28 to 30. Now listen and answer questions 28 to 30.
I expect it'll take me a while to find what I need. There's such a lot here.
Yes, there is. But if you need help getting started, this term we're running 3 study skills workshops.
Oh? What are they on?
Let me see. The first one's on resources. Yes, here it is. How to use the library's resources. That includes everything, not just the print and technical resources.
That sounds useful. Is there anything on using the internet?
Let's see. The one on the internet for beginners was last term. This term it's finding research materials online.
That sounds interesting too. What's the last one?
It's a workshop on dissertations.
What do you mean? How to write one?
No, it's more to do with academic writing conventions. You know, writing a bibliography and how to refer to sources in your text, that sort of thing. Anyway, here's a leaflet with information about all three.
Oh, thanks a lot. That'll be very useful.
You're welcome.
That is the end of section 3. You now have half a minute to check your answers.
Section 3. You will hear a tutor talking to two business students called Philip and Janice about their research on managing individuals. First, you have some time to look at questions 21 to 23. Now listen carefully and answer questions 21 to 23.
Well, you've both been looking at different styles of managing individuals in companies and the workplace. How's the research going, Philip?
Well, I've been looking at why individualism, individual differences, are such an important area of management studies. When you think about any organisation, be it a family business or a multinational company, they're all fundamentally a group of people working together. But it's what these individuals contribute to their places of work that makes you realise how important they are. Of course, they bring different ideas, but it's also their attitudes and their experiences of learning. Diversity is important in these areas too.
So why do people behave so differently from one another at work?
There are lots of reasons, but research has shown that a lot of it comes down to personality. And the other factor is gender. It's a well-known fact that men and women do lots of things in different ways, and the workplace is no different.
Did you look at the effects of this variation on companies?
Yes, I did. On the positive side, exposure to such diversity helps encourage creativity, which is generally an asset to a company. But unfortunately, individual differences are also the root of conflict between staff, and they can lead to difficulties for management, which can sometimes be serious.
Before you hear the rest of the conversation, you have some time to look at questions 24 to 30. Now listen and answer questions 24 to 30.
Thanks, Philip. So now I guess the two main things to remember here are to identify individual talent and then to utilize it. So, Janice, you were looking at identifying different talents in workers. Do you think this is easy for managers to do?
Well, currently, teamwork is in fashion in the workplace. And in my opinion, the importance of the individual is generally neglected. What managers should be targeting is those employees who can take the lead in a situation and are not afraid to accept the idea of responsibility.
That's true, Janice, but Unfortunately, many managers think the entire notion of encouraging individuality amongst their staff is far too hard.
Yes, that may be true, but I think one of the most important tasks of managers is to consider the needs of the individual on one hand and group cooperation and conformity on the other. It requires creative thinking on the part of management to avoid tension.
So, Janice, what kind of people do you think companies should be looking for?
Well, it has to start from the very beginning, when companies are looking for new employees. When the personnel department is choosing between applicants, they need to look for someone who's broken the mould and can think for themselves. Instead, people making these decisions often use a range of psychological tests to see if a person is a problem solver or will do as they're told. I'm not convinced these qualities are actually the most important.
So, do you think being a good team player is overrated?
No, it's not overrated. You do need to learn the rules and learn them fast. No individual can get around this if you're working in an organisation.
So how should managers deal with this?
Rewards. When an individual demonstrates the behaviour the organisation expects, some kind of incentive can be given. What's important here is that this happens right at the beginning, so new recruits learn the rules of the system immediately. Also, the incentive should be something the individual actually wants, and this isn't always just money.
To come back to you, Philip, you were saying that recognition of good performers is essential. Now, what else should managers be looking for?
Well, managing people means you not only have an understanding of your employees, but you also recognise the culture of the organisation. In fact, for some organisations, creativity and individuality may be the last thing they want to see during working hours.
Very true.
Yes, but managing people isn't as easy as it looks. For example, change in the workplace can be quite tricky, especially if there's a need to increase profit. And at times like these, managers may have to give priority to profit rather than individual staff needs.
Yes, and that creates difficult situations for people.
Yes, but what's important is that managers are able to deal with quite high levels of personal stress. During times of change, they should be thinking not only about the strain on their staff, but take time out to think of themselves.
Absolutely. So, what are the implications of that?
That is the end of section 3. You now have half a minute to check your answers. Section 3. You will hear a seminar with Dr. Martin Merriweather of the Antarctic Centre in Christchurch, New Zealand. First, you have some time to look at questions 21 to 26. Now listen carefully and answer questions 21 to 26.
We're pleased to welcome Dr. Martin Merriweather of the Antarctic Centre in Christchurch, New Zealand, who has come along to talk to us today about the role of the centre and the Antarctic Treaty. Now, my first question is about the choice of location for the centre. Why Christchurch? Was it because of the climate?
Well, actually, New Zealand is the second closest country to Antarctica, and Christchurch is often used on Antarctic expeditions.
Right, so it's because of where we are, coupled with our historical role. So tell us, what is the main purpose of the centre?
Oh, well, we have two complementary roles. One is as a scientific base for expeditions and research, and the other is as an information centre.
Tell us something about the role as a scientific base.
Well, we're able to provide information about what scientists should take with them to the South Pole. For example, the centre contains a clothing warehouse where expeditions are supplied with suitable clothing for the extreme conditions.
I suppose you need a bit more than your normal winter coat.
Yes, exactly. And then there's also the specialist library and mapping services.
Right. And which countries are actually located at the centre?
Well, the centre houses research programs for New Zealand, for the United States, as well as for Italy. There's even a US post office at the American Air Force Base here.
Really? And what does the visitor centre offer?
Well, since very few people will ever experience the Antarctic firsthand, the Visitors Centre aims to recreate the atmosphere of Antarctica. There's a mock campsite where you can see inside an Antarctic tent and imagine yourself sleeping there. And the centre also acts as a showcase for the unique international cooperation which exists in Antarctica today.
What is it actually like at the South Pole? I know you've been there on a number of occasions.
Yes, I have, and each time I'm struck by the awesome beauty of the place. It's magnificent, but you can really only visit it in the summer months.
October to March?
Yes, because it's completely dark for 4 months of the year. And, in addition, it has to be the coldest place on Earth.
Colder than the North Pole? Why is that?
Well, unlike the North Pole, which is actually a frozen sea, Antarctica is a landmass shaped like a dome, with the result that the winds blow down the slopes at speeds of up to 150 kilometres an hour. And that's what makes it so cold.
Oh.
And one other interesting thing is that Antarctica is the driest continent on Earth, surprisingly, and so you have to drink large amounts of water when you're there.
How old is Antarctica?
Oh, we're pretty sure it was part of a larger landmass, but it broke away from the rest of the continent 170 million years ago.
How can you be certain of this?
Because fossils and rocks have been discovered in Antarctica, which are the same as those found in places such as Africa and Australia.
Amazing. To think that it was once attached to Africa.
Before you hear the rest of the interview, you have some time to look at questions 27 to 30. Now listen and answer questions 27 to 30.
Now, let's just have a look at the Antarctic Treaty. How far back does the idea of an international treaty go?
Well, as far back as the 19th century, when 11 nations organised an international event.
When was that exactly?
In 1870, and it was called the Polar Research Meeting. And then, not long after that, they organised something called the First International Polar Year.
And that took place when exactly?
Over 2 years, from 1882 to 1883. But it wasn't until the 1950s that the idea of an international treaty was proposed. And in 1959, the treaty was actually signed.
What do you see as the main achievements of the treaty?
Well, firstly, it means that the continent is reserved for peaceful use.
That's Article 1, isn't it?
Yes.
That's important, since the territory belongs to everyone.
Yes, but not as important as Article 5, which prohibits any nuclear explosions or waste disposal.
Which is marvellous. Well, I'm afraid we're going to have to stop there because I'm afraid we've run out of time. Thanks for coming along today and telling us all about the centre and its work.
That is the end of section 3. You now have half a minute to check your answers. Section 3. You will hear part of a seminar on ocean research given by a climate scientist. First, you have some time to look at questions 21 to 25. Now listen carefully and answer questions 21 to 25.
Thanks to all of you for coming along today to hear about how the robotic float project is helping with ocean research. Well, first of all, we'll look at what a robotic float does and its use. So let's start with the device itself. It looks a bit like a cigar, and it's about 1.5 meters long. More importantly, it's full of equipment that's designed to collect data. So it can help us in building up a profile of different factors which work together within the world's oceans.
Sounds like a big project. Isn't it too big for one country to undertake?
That's quite true, but this project is a really good example of international cooperation. Over the last 5 years, scientists from 13 countries have been taking part in the project and launching floats in their area of ocean control. And next year, this number will rise to 14 when Indonesia joins the project.
That's impressive.
But let's move on to how floats work. The operational cycle goes like this. Each of the floats is dropped in the ocean from a boat at a set point and activated from a satellite. Then the float immediately sinks about 2,000 meters. That's 2 whole kilometers down in the water. It stays at this depth for about 10 days and is carried around by the currents which operate in the ocean at this level. During this time, it's possible for it to cover quite large distances, but the average is 50 kilometers.
So, what is it actually recording?
Well, at this stage, nothing. But as it rises to the surface, it collects all sorts of data. Most importantly, variations in salinity, that's salt levels, and the changes in temperature, a bit like underwater weather balloons. Then, when it gets back to the surface, all the data it's collected is beamed up to the satellite. After about 5 hours on the surface, the float automatically sinks, beginning the whole process again.
What happens to the data?
Well, the information is transferred direct to onshore meteorological stations, like our one in Hobart, and within 4 hours the findings can be on computers, and they can be mapped and analysed.
Before you hear the rest of the seminar, you have some time to look at questions 26 to 30. Now listen and answer questions 26 to 30.
You say you're building models of the world's ocean systems, but how are they going to be used? And more importantly, when?
Some of the data has already helped in completing projects. For example, our understanding of the underlying causes of El Niño events is being confirmed by float data. Another way we're using float data is to help us to understand the mechanics of climate change, like global warming and ozone depletion. That's part of an ongoing variability study, but the results are still a long way off. However, this is not the case with our ocean weather forecasting. Because we know from the floats what the prevailing weather conditions will be in certain parts of the ocean, we can advise the Navy on search and rescue missions. That's happening right now, and many yachtsmen owe their lives to the success of this project. In addition, the float data can help us to look at the biological implications of ocean processes.
Would that help with preserving fish stocks?
Yes, and advising governments on fisheries legislation. We're well on the way to completing a project on this. We hope it will help to bring about more sustainable fishing practices. We'll be seeing the results of that quite soon.
It sounds like the data from floats has lots of applications.
Yes, it does. It's also a powerful agricultural tool. If we were aware of what the weather would be like, say, next year, we could make sure that the farmers planted appropriate grain varieties to produce the best yield from the available rainfall.
That sounds a bit like science fiction, especially when now we can't even tell them when a drought will break.
I agree that this concept is still a long way in the future, but it will come eventually, and the float data will have made a contribution.
That is the end of section 3. You now have half a minute to check your answers. Section 3. You will hear 2 students discussing a geography presentation they're going to give. First, you have some time to look at questions 21 to 26. Now listen carefully and answer questions 21 to 26.
Remind me, Trevor, how long is the presentation?
Dr. White said 3 per hour.
So about 20 minutes.
Well, it'll be 15 minutes per presentation.
And 5 minutes for questions?
And is this one going to be assessed?
No, not this time round, because it's the first one, you know.
Oh, good news.
Well, Trevor, what are we going to include?
Well, do you think we ought to give some historical background?
Oh, no, definitely not. We won't have time.
OK, but I think we ought to say something about the geographical location, because not a lot of people know where the islands are.
Yes, OK. I'll take notes, shall I?
Yeah, that'd be a help.
So, geographical location?
Then we ought to give an overview of the whole education system.
Shouldn't we say something about the economy? You know, agricultural produce, minerals and so forth?
Well, Dr. White said we shouldn't go into that sort of detail.
But it's pretty important when you think about it, you know, because it does influence the education system.
Look, let's think about that one later, shall we? Let's see how we're doing for time.
OK, so general overview of education.
Of course. And then the role of English language.
No, that goes in the language policy seminar, don't you remember?
Are you sure?
Positive.
All right. So those are the topics we're going to be covering.
Mm-hmm.
Before you hear the rest of the discussion, you have some time to look at questions 27 to 30. Now listen and answer questions 27 to 30.
We need to think about what to prepare. Dr. White said he wanted us to use plenty of visuals and things, and we might as well try them out when we're not being assessed.
Well, the most important thing is the overhead projector.
No problem. We'll get that from the media room. Must remember to book it.
Well, we'll need a map, of course.
Probably 2. One of the islands, large scale.
And one of West Africa.
Well, the West African one is no problem. There's one in the resources room.
Oh, yeah, of course, the resources room. The islands are going to be more of a problem.
Tell you what, there's a very clear map of Santiago in that tourist brochure I showed you last week. Don't you remember it?
Oh, yeah, that's right. We can just use the tourist brochure.
We also need statistics on several different things.
Literacy rates.
Yes, and school places.
How about the encyclopedia?
Nah, not up to date enough.
Why don't we call the embassy?
Oh,
Oh, someone's enthusiastic.
Well, if something's worth doing.
I know, it's worth doing well. OK.
We can find out statistics on school places from them as well.
Might as well.
Look, Julie, it's almost time for our tutorials. We can meet again on Monday, but we need to prepare some stuff before then.
That is the end of section 3. You now have half a minute to check your answers. Section 3. You will hear a student called Sandra talking to her tutor about a draft proposal she has written for a competition. First, you have some time to look at questions 21 to 24. Now listen carefully and answer questions 21 to 24.
Right, Sandra. You wanted to see me to get some feedback on your group's proposal, the one you're submitting for the Geography Society field trip competition.
Uh-huh.
I've had a look through your proposal, and I think it's a really good choice.
Oh.
In fact, I only have a few things to say about it, but even in an outline document like this, you really have to be careful to avoid typos and problems with layout in the proposal, and even in the contents page. So read it through carefully before submitting it, okay?
Will do.
And I've made a few notes on the proposal about things which could have been better sequenced.
Okay.
As for the writing itself, I've annotated the proposal as and where I thought it could be improved. Generally speaking, I feel you've often used complex structures and long sentences for the sake of it, and as a consequence, although your paragraphing and inclusion of subheadings help, it's quite hard to follow your train of thought at times.
Oh.
So, cut them down a bit, can you?
Really?
Yes, and don't forget simple formatting like numbering.
Didn't I use page numbers?
I didn't mean that. Look, you've remembered to include headers and footers, which is good, but listing ideas clearly is important. Number them or use bullet points, which is even clearer. Then you'll focus the reader on your main points. I thought your suggestion to go to the Navajo Tribal Park was a very good idea.
No, I've always wanted to go there. My father was a great fan of cowboy films and the Wild West, so I was subjected to seeing all the epics, many of which were shot there.
Mm-hmm.
As a consequence, it feels very familiar to me, and it's awesome, both geographically and visually. So it's somewhere I've always wanted to visit. The subsequent research I did and the online photographs made me even keener.
Before you hear the rest of the conversation, you have some time to look at questions 25 to 30. Now listen and answer questions 25 to 30.
Interesting. Right, let's look at the content of your proposal now.
Did you find it comprehensive enough?
Well, yes and no. You've listed several different topics on your contents page, but I'm not sure they're all relevant.
No? Well, I thought that from the perspective of a field trip, one thing I needed to focus on was the sandstone plateau and cliffs themselves. The way they tower up from the flat landscape is just amazing.
The fact that the surrounding softer rocks were eroded by wind and rain, leaving these huge outcrops high above the plain. It's hardly surprising that tourists flock to see the area.
Well, yes, I'd agree with including those points.
And then the fact that it's been home to Native American Navajos and all the social history that goes with that. The hardships they endured trying to save their territory from the invading settlers. Their culture is so rich. All those wonderful stories.
Well, I agree it's interesting, but it's not immediately relevant to your proposal, Sandra. So, at this stage, I suggest you focus on other considerations. I think an indication of what the students on the trip could actually do when they get there should be far more central, so that certainly needs to be included and to be expanded upon. And I'd like to see something about the local wildlife and vegetation, too. Not that I imagine there's much to see. Presumably the tourist invasion hasn't helped.
Okay, I'll do some work on those two areas as well. But you're right, there's not much apart from some very shallow-rooted species. Although it's cold and snowy there in the winter, the earth is baked so hard in the summer sun that rainwater can't penetrate. So it's a case of flood or drought, really.
So I understand. Now, before we look at everything in more detail, I've got a few factual questions for you. It would be a good idea to include the answers in your finished proposal, because they're missing from your draft.
Fine.
So you mentioned the monoliths and the spires, which was good. But what area does the tribal park cover? Do you know?
12,000 hectares, and the plain is at about 5,850 meters above sea level.
Larger than I expected. Okay, where's the nearest accommodation? That's a practical detail that you haven't included. Have you done any research on that?
Yes. There's nowhere to stay in the park itself, but there's an old trading post called Goulding quite near. All kinds of tours start from Goulding, too.
What kind of tours?
Well, the most popular are in four-wheel drive Jeeps, but I wouldn't recommend hiring those. I think the best way to appreciate the area would be to hire horses instead and trek around on those. Biking is not allowed, and it's impossible to drive around the area in private vehicles. The tracks are too rough.
Okay. Lastly, what else is worth visiting there?
There are several caves, but I haven't looked into any details. I'll find out about them.
Okay, good. Now what I'd like to know is more about...
That is the end of section 3. You now have half a minute to check your answers. Section 3. You will hear part of a seminar in which a researcher called Grant Freeman discusses his work on Australian honeybees with a group of students. First, you have some time to look at questions 21 to 24. Now listen carefully and answer questions 21 to 24.
Good morning, everyone. In today's seminar, Grant Freeman, a biologist who specialises in identifying insects and who works for the Australian Quarantine Service, has come to talk to us about his current research work. Right, well, over to you, Grant.
Good morning, everyone. I'm sure that you know that the Quarantine Service regulates all food brought into Australia. Well, obviously they want to protect Australia from diseases that might come in with imported goods, but they also want to prevent insect pests from being introduced into the country, and that's where I have a part to play.
Anyway, my current research involves trying to find a particular type of bee, the Asian honeybee, and finding out whether there are any of them around in various states of Australia. We discovered a few of them in Queensland once and eradicated them. Now we're pretty keen to make sure that there aren't any more getting in, particularly to New South Wales and other states.
What's wrong with Asian honeybees? Are they so different from Australian bees?
Well, in fact, they look almost the same, but they are infested with mites, microscopic creatures which live on them, and which can seriously damage our own homegrown bees, or could even wipe them out.
Well, what would happen if Australian bees died out?
Well, the honey from Australian bees is of excellent quality, much better than the stuff the Asian bees produce. In fact, Australia exports native queen bees to a large number of countries because of this. When the European honeybee was first discovered out in the bush, we found they made really unpleasant honey, and they were also too big to pollinate many of our native flowers here in Australia.
That must have had a devastating effect on the natural flora. Did you lose any species?
No, we managed to get them under control before that happened. But if Asian bees got in, there could be other consequences. We could lose a lot of money because you might not be aware, but it's estimated that native bees' pollination of flower and vegetable crops is worth $1.2 billion a year. So in a way, they're the farmer's friend. Oh, and another thing is, if you're stung by an Asian honeybee, it can produce an allergic reaction in some people, so they're much more dangerous than native bees.
Before you hear the rest of the seminar, you have some time to look at questions 25 to 30. Now listen and answer questions 25 to 30.
How will you know if Asian bees have entered Australia?
We're looking at the diet of the bird called the rainbow bee-eater. The bee-eater doesn't care what it eats as long as they're insects. But the interesting thing about this bird is that we are able to analyse exactly what it eats, and that's really helpful if we're looking for introduced insects.
How come?
Because insects have their skeletons outside their bodies, so the bee-eaters digest the meat from the inside. Then they bring up all the indigestible bits of skeleton, and of course the wings, in a pellet, a small ball of waste material which they cough up.
That sounds a bit unpleasant. So how do you go about it?
In the field, we track down the bee-eaters and find their favourite feeding spots, the places where the birds usually feed. It's here that we can find the pellets. We collect them up and take them back to the laboratory to examine the contents.
How do you do that?
The pellets are really hard, especially if they've been out in the sun for a few days. So, first of all, we treat them by adding water to moisten them and make them softer. Then we pull them apart under the microscope. Everything's all scrunched up, but we're looking for wings, so we just pull them all out and straighten them. Then we identify them to see if we can find any Asian bee wings.
And how many have you found?
So far, our research shows that Asian bees have not entered Australia in any number. It's a good result and much more reliable than trying to find live ones as evidence of introduced insects.
Well, that's fascinating. Thank you, Grant, for those insights. I hope that you might inspire some of our students here to conduct some similar experiments.
That is the end of section 3. You now have half a minute to check your answers. Section 3. You will hear a university tutor and a new student called Paul discussing Paul's work experience and Latin American Studies course. First, you have some time to look at questions 21 to 26.
Now listen carefully and answer questions 21 to 26.
I've been reading your personal statement, Paul. First, let's talk about your work experience in South America. What took you there? Was it to gain more fluency in Spanish?
Well, as I'm combining Spanish with Latin American studies, my main idea was to find out more about the way people lived there. My spoken Spanish was already pretty good, in fact.
So you weren't too worried about language barriers?
No. In fact, I ended up teaching English there, although that wasn't my original choice of work.
I see. How did you find out about all this?
I found an agency that runs all kinds of voluntary projects in South America.
What kind of work?
Well, there were several possibilities.
You mean construction, engineering work?
Yes, getting involved in building projects was an option. Then there was tourism, taking tourists for walks around the volcanoes, which I actually chose to do, and then there was work with local farmers.
But you didn't continue with that project. Why not?
Because I never really knew whether I'd be needed or not. I'd thought it might be difficult physically, but I was certainly fit enough. No, I wanted to do something that had more of a proper structure to it, I suppose. I get demotivated otherwise.
What do you think you learned from your experience? It must have been a great opportunity to examine community life.
Yes, but it was difficult at first to be accepted by the locals. It was a very remote village, and some of them were reluctant to speak to me, although they were always interested in my clothes and how much I had to pay for them.
Well, that's understandable.
Yes, but things soon improved. What struck me was that when people became more comfortable with me and less suspicious, we really connected with each other in a meaningful way.
You made good friends?
Yes, with two of the families in particular.
Good. What about management? Did you have a project manager?
Yes, and he gave me lots of advice and guidance.
And was he good at managing too?
That wasn't his strong point. I think he was often more interested in the academic side of things than filing reports. He was a bit of a dreamer.
And did you have a contract?
I had to stay for a minimum of 3 months. My parents were surprised when I asked to stay longer, 6 months in the end. I was so happy there.
And did anything on the administration side of things surprise you? What was the food and lodging like?
Simple, but there was plenty to eat, and I only paid $7 a day for that, which was amazing, really. And they gave me all the equipment I needed, even a laptop.
You didn't expect that then?
No.
Well, I'll look forward to hearing more.
Before you hear the rest of the discussion, you have some time to look at questions 27 to 30. Now listen and answer questions 27 to 30.
But now let's look at these modules. You'll need to start thinking about which ones you'll definitely want to study. The first one here is Gender Studies in Latin America. It looks at how gender analysis is reconfiguring civil society in Latin America. Women are increasingly occupying positions in government and in other elected leadership positions in Latin America. I think you'd find it interesting.
If it was to do with people in the villages rather than those in the public sphere, I would.
OK. What about second language acquisition?
Do you think I'd find that useful?
Well, you've had some practical experience in the field. I think it would be.
I hadn't thought about that. I'll put that down as a definite then.
OK. What about Indigenous women's lives? That sounds appropriate.
I thought so too, but I looked at last year's exam questions and that changed my mind.
Don't judge the value of the course on that. Maybe talk to some other students first, and we can talk about it again later.
OK.
Yes, and lastly, will you sign up for Portuguese lessons?
My Spanish is good, so would I find that module easy?
Not necessarily. Some people find that Spanish interferes with learning Portuguese, getting the accent right too. It's quite different in a lot of ways.
Well, I'd much sooner do something else then.
All right. Now, what we need to do is make a...
That is the end of section 3. You now have half a minute to check your answers. Section 3. You will hear two students called Dan and Jeannie discussing their studies at university. First, you have some time to look at questions 21 to 26. Now listen carefully and answer questions 21 to 26.
Hi, Jeannie. How's it going?
Oh, hello, Dan. Pretty well, thanks. Have you managed to get the money for the course yet?
Yes, that's all sorted out now, thanks. It took long enough, though. It was practically a year ago that I applied to my local council for a grant, and it took them 6 months to turn me down.
That's really slow.
And I thought I was eligible for government funding, but it seems I was mistaken. So then I asked the boss of the company I used to work for if they would sponsor me, and much to my surprise, he said they'd make a contribution.
But what about college grants and scholarships? There must be some you could apply for.
Yes, there are, but they're all so small that I decided to leave them until I was desperate.
Uh-huh.
And in fact, I didn't need to apply. My parents had been saying that as I already had a job, I ought to support myself through college. But in the end, they took pity on me, so now I've just about got enough.
That's good.
So now I can put a bit of effort into meeting people. Haven't had time so far. Any suggestions?
What about joining some college clubs?
Oh, right. You joined several, didn't you?
Yes. I'm in the drama club. It's our first performance next week, so we're rehearsing frantically, and I've got behind with my work. But it's worth it. I'm hoping to be in the spring production too.
I've never liked acting. Are you doing anything else?
I enjoyed singing when I was at school, so I joined a group when I came to college. I don't think the conductor stretches us enough, though, so I'll give up after the next concert. And I also joined the debating society. It's fun, but with all the rehearsing I'm doing, something has to go, and I'm afraid that's the one.
Do you do any sports?
Yes, I'm in one of the hockey teams. I'm not very good, but I'd really miss it if I stopped. I decided to try tennis when I came to college, and I'm finding it pretty tough going. I'm simply not fit enough.
Nor me. I think I'll give that a miss.
I'm hoping it'll help me to build up my stamina, but it'll probably be a long haul.
Good luck.
Thanks.
How are you finding the course?
I wish we had more seminars.
What? I'd have thought we had more than enough already. All those people saying clever things that I could never think of. It's quite interesting, but I wonder if I'm clever enough to be doing this course.
I find it helpful to listen to the other people. I like the way we're exploring the subject and working towards getting insight into it.
How do you get on with your tutor? I don't think I'm on the same wavelength as mine, so I feel I'm not getting anything out of the tutorials. It would be more productive to read a book instead.
Oh, mine's very demanding. She gives me lots of feedback and advice, so I've got much better at writing essays. And she's helping me plan my revision for the end-of-year exams.
Do tell me, I always struggle with revision.
Before you hear the rest of the discussion, you have some time to look at questions 27 to 30. Now listen and answer questions 27 to 30.
Well, the first thing is to find out exactly what's required in the exams.
Would it help to get hold of some past papers?
Yes, they'll help to make it clear.
Right, I'll do that. Then what?
Then you can sort out your revision priorities based on what's most likely to come up. I put these on a card and read them through regularly.
Uh-huh.
But That isn't enough in itself. You also need a timetable to see how you can fit everything in the time available. Then keep it in front of you while you're studying.
I've done that before, but it hasn't helped me.
Maybe you need to do something different every day. So if you break down your revision into small tasks and allocate them to specific days, there's more incentive to tackle them. With big topics, you're more likely to put off starting.
Good idea.
And as I revise each topic, I write a single paragraph about it. Then later I can read it through quickly and it helps fix things in my mind.
Oh, that's brilliant.
I also write answers to questions for the exam practice. It's hard to make myself do it though.
Well, I'll try. Thanks a lot, Jeannie. That's a great help.
No problem.
See you around.
Bye.
That is the end of section 3. You now have half a minute to check your answers.